Hello and welcome to the 8th step to an enlightened mind and transcending stress and suffering. Now, before we begin, I just want to reiterate that all these steps overlap and they're all aiming to get one thing to happen, and that is a complete change, a shift in your sense of identity, a shift from being identified with this to being identified with that. That in which this, the mind, this, the body, and this, the world, are appearing and disappearing from moment to moment. Because this world we see and this body and this mind all are subject to constant change. But you, who you really are, the essence of who you are, is unchanging. It's constant. It's the ever-present element of every experience, without which you'd have no experience. So today's step can be summed up in a couple of stories. One is the one I told you last week about my re-experiencing my pre-birth trauma regarding hunger and the sensation of hunger, where I found myself re-experiencing being a little fetal body, suddenly beset with something which I didn't know what it was until after I had the experience and reflected back upon it, that I was suddenly seized in every cell of this little body with hunger, and I could do nothing about it because presumably my mother hadn't eaten and her blood sugar was down, so that I was completely dependent on, this little body was completely dependent on whether she ate or not and the level of the blood sugar. So that for some 15 minutes or so, I felt this inescapable pain. And that what helped was when I realized there was another me outside of the little tiny body. In fact, the little tiny body was kind of in this space of this other me. And that as I recognized that and I shifted my sense of I to this, in which I was appearing as a little fetal body. When I shifted to that, my face which was fully in my face, the hunger, the inescapable pain, and suddenly I was transcending it while still experiencing it. But it was down here and I was back here, even within the womb, that space within the womb, beyond the fetal body where the amniotic fluid was, and you know, that within my mother's body, but that it extended. So similar to that, today's step is I am that which is like space. Why? Because I am that in which all this, the three areas of experience, mind, changing thoughts, feelings, both the mind with thoughts and the body with a correlation with thoughts, physical correlates of anger, tension, fear, heart pounding, and so forth. And sensations in the body, irrespective of feelings, just aches and pains and pleasures. And then sights, sounds, touches, tastes, and smells, that which constitute the world. Okay, so what we do is realizing that we are that space. By my realizing I was that which in which this body was appearing and the hunger within the body was appearing, I had a breathing room, the space that I could endure this discomfort. Now, another story is two women came to me who had hesitant to be born babies, and they were late, and they wanted me to do some Reiki to see if I might facilitate their giving birth. And in both instances, they both had houses with vaulted ceilings. And in both instances, I placed my hands about 6 inches above their distended abdomens, and I began to send the healing energy of Reiki, and in my mind to talk to the fetus and ask, that to be calmed and so forth, and to tune in to see what could be happening to help them be born. And so within a couple days of the Reiki, they both were able to give birth because they were weeks late. But what I discovered is as soon as I had my hands on above their abdomens, suddenly I felt an energy go up my spine to the vaulted ceiling and fill the whole room. And it was the same energy or consciousness that I felt within, through my hands, within the fetal body that was in the womb, and extended well beyond it. And so I began in both instances to get a sense that the spirit was not completely isolated and confined to the body, but that in fact the body was existing within this field of spirit, this vast field. And so that told me that when we think of it, we often think of, I have a body and my spirit is in the body, as if my and spirit are two separate things. It's not who I am, essentially, but it is. And using language precisely is important here, because it's the me that's in the little fetal body, animating it. And in the case of the two women, the baby bodies, it's animating the baby body, but it's not confined to it. And so often when we think my spirit is in here, well, there is an energy in here, and that's where I tend to think of it as the embodied soul, which is an extension of the spirit space that is now coming in and animating this physical form. So that when we die, when the body dies and we see there's no light in the eye, there's a vacant look, and there's no sign of animation. And so that's when this spirit, the soul that was the extension of spirit into the body, has been removed, and our eyes are like flameless wicks. There's no light. And again, another little aside is, when we use the word enlightenment, think about the word light being central to the word enlightenment. And that's where we get the clue of the light of consciousness, which is spirit, the traditional word for consciousness, the light of consciousness, the light of awareness. And that is who we essentially are. And remember that when we get up in the morning, or just as we awake in the morning, the first thing, the most fundamental experience is, I am aware that I am, that I exist. And I am aware that I'm aware before I start to be aware of, it may happen very quickly, of the objects in my room. If there's a bureau, a TV, the bed, the sensation of lying in bed, the feeling of the carpet when I step on the carpet, the thoughts of what I'm going to do today, this, that, and the other thing. So that we're often just filled, our awareness is filled with objects. And so today we're talking about, I am that which is like space. Why? Because I am that in which all these objects, outer, inner thoughts, feelings, sensations, outer, sights, sounds, touch, taste, smells, all that is appearing. And when you ground yourself in that place, and this is what it's about, these steps are to just get you to make that one shift, and you find such a relief from stress, as I found in that intrauterine environment where I felt hunger, and I was dependent on whether my body was dependent on whether my mother ate or not, or had the level of blood sugar necessary for me to not feel hungry. And I remember what a feeling. It was like I had gone to the shores of that space from a tsunami of discomfort and found rest in that. And so as we go through the day, we can rest in that concept of, I am that which is like space. Eckhart Tolle made a comment that was interesting, that if you really go out tonight, I want you to go out and look at the night sky and notice the stars and the planets and so forth. Notice the lights that you see in the sky, and notice the space, the velvety black space within which the lights are appearing. And know that you and I are more essentially space than we are form. Yet we have practiced and been totally in our life growing up, from a little baby body to a toddler body to a child body to an adolescent body and so forth, we have been identified with this. And this, our mind. And we have not been able to get that breathing room, that space, in touch with that space within which this is happening. So that when you realize and make that shift that you and I are fundamentally consciousness, without which none of this appears or is experienced. When you make that shift, it's a tremendous relief. You'll still feel aches and pains. You'll still have thoughts of fear or anger. And yet there's a little breathing room between you, who you really are, and these sensations, these feelings, and so forth, the discomfort, and so forth. Okay, now, the other idea is often that this idea that in the course of a day, if you just notice, like as you're sitting here seeing me on your computer screen or TV screen, and you're hearing my words, and you're maybe looking out the window, and maybe it's, as it is today, a beautiful, beautiful fall day. All these things are happening within the space of your awareness. Now, we use space, but space itself is an object which we can be aware of, as we can be aware of the space in the night sky. Or if you go out and look at the blue sky and see the space between the clouds, you and I are more essentially the space of sky within which the clouds come and go, within which the planes fly forth and so forth. Now, in that regard, then, in the course of a day, as you sit here now, and again, looking at the TV screen, looking at the computer screen, and you begin to notice that you're the space in which you are aware of me speaking and of the computer and of the room you're in, that you can begin to use the metaphor that Rupert Spira uses, which is, as awareness, we are like the space of a room, unaffected by all the contents and objects within the room. The chair I'm in, the bookcase, the sofa, the table. If I were to yell and scream, if I jump up and down, none of that agitates the space. The space is completely there, just experiencing all this. And so if you just begin in the course of a day to just notice once in a while, look around and notice the space between objects in the room, and know that you are more like that than you are the objects. True, you are the objects. True, you are this body. True, you are this mind. Yet fundamentally underlying that, the background to which all this is taking place is more like space. But again, remember, that's why we use the term, I am that which is like space, because space itself is an object. It can be witnessed, it can be seen. But you and I are the eternal subject within which all this is appearing. Okay, so keep that in mind. So in the course of a day, whenever you're feeling a little stressed and so forth, you can stop, and you are witnessing this stress you're feeling with your boss or whatever, and then stop and say, I am that which is like space. Breathing in, breathing out. And I am removed from that which is occurring to me right now. Now, Eckhart Tolle has a way of doing this, which he recommended when you're stressed. You can say, use an example of somebody's mother-in-law, their face is contorted and they're angry or resentful of something that you've said, and they're confronting you and complaining. And can I be the space for this face that is giving forth these words and criticism? Can I be the space for this? As you ask yourself that question, you stop and say, yes, I am the space for this. And then you just watch and listen, see and hear, while feeling the peace of being identified with that space. Again, watch and listen, see and hear, while feeling the peace, resting in that peace of being like space. Now, another thing that's interesting, I find, is that if you think about forgiveness and spirit kind of go hand in hand, in that this space of spirit, which is consciousness, another way to put it, this space of spirit is peaceful. It's a space of love and joy. It's this space in which you can step back and experience this without having it fully in your face, as I did with that regard to hunger in the womb. Okay, so forgiveness isn't necessary if you're accepting what is, because, as Eckhart Tolle has said, which is brilliant, what is already is. It's already happened, so accepting it is necessary even if you want to change what's happening and make it a better situation. You have to acknowledge that it is what it is, and you accept it, and then you make your move to change it or remove yourself from the situation or whatever. Okay, so forgiveness only happens, and it happened for me. I realized that forgiveness was predicated upon having made a judgment first of condemning something, of not liking something. So when my father was in the hospital years ago, and I was in graduate school, and I was coming back from graduate school in Virginia back to my home state of Delaware where he was in the hospital, I remember I had this moment where I kind of was flashing on the little 8-year-old me in a meditation. And in that meditation, I saw the little 8-year-old me say to my father, who was often critical and very demanding. In fact, my Uncle Vinny said to my father once, "Why don't you lay off the kid? You're trying to make him perfect." And so I remember saying, "Daddy, I forgive you." And instantly, I felt an anxiety shoot through my little 8-year-old body as I witnessed this. And the next thing that I said immediately was, "And I forgive myself for judging you." And it's only been more recently in my study of the ancient texts of the Upanishads and this whole movement in the study of the science of consciousness that I began to realize that, and the study of A Course in Miracles, that condemnation of some sort precedes forgiveness. If you don't condemn, you don't need to forgive. If you accept, there's no need for forgiveness. And I heard a really interesting discussion with Rupert Spira, with two A Course in Miracle teachers, Bill Free and Amy Torres. And he was explaining that and asking them to consider, and I ask you this now, where is the resentment, the lack of forgiveness in the space between and beyond the judging thoughts? Where is that resentment and anger in that space between the judging thoughts? There is none. The judging thought leads immediately to the anger or the lack of forgiveness. So I found one thing to do when you're finding yourself in that place of unforgiveness with somebody, whether it's a person in line, that butt in line at the grocery store, or is taking too much time, or any little thing, a guy who cuts you off in traffic. Stop. Again, using the first set of steps, breathing in cool. I can keep my mind cool and my body calm no matter what's happening. And then thank you to this person for reminding me that I am the vast space, like the blue sky or like the night sky between the stars, between the clouds and the blue sky. I am the vast space between my judging thoughts. And just rest in that space. Now, in the course of the day, over this next week, try practicing taking a look at the blue sky and reminding yourself, I am that which is like space. Breathing in and breathing out, just like this blue sky is the space between the clouds. And breathing in, I am that which is like space. Breathing out, just like the dark night sky beyond the stars. And one little interesting story before we stop today. When I wrote The Space Between Stars, the way the title came to me was I had finished my book, Words Become Flesh, and was getting ready to present it, to send it to the publisher. And the computer kept crashing when I was trying to make it into a PDF. And it crashed. And finally, my friend who was working on this with me noticed that there was no font or value assigned to the space between the little asterisks on one of the pages. So there was no space between, and what are asterisks? Little stars. And so when the space between the forms was ignored, I thought to myself, when space between what is and what I'd love to have happen is ignored, life crashes. So it depends on what you fill the space between what is and what you would love to have happen. Do you fill it with love and confidence and faith, or do you fill it with fear and doubt and anger? Makes a difference. Well, I didn't realize as I was writing that I was being given a clue. And if you begin to pay attention in your own life, you'll see synchronicities. That is, the shamans taught me, the Mayan shamans, and I've read other texts that point to this. When you look, you'll be led. I think AA uses that as a kind of a reminder too. If you pay attention, you're often, everything that's happening, as some of the spiritual teachers will say, is calculated to help you make that next step in your spiritual growth, into the growth of realizing you are spirit, and then secondarily the body and mind and so forth. So what I began to realize is, as I finished the book, I was writing the book from the standpoint of contrasting and telling the story of me as an embodied soul from the standpoint of my spirit, of who I really am, and talking about what Stephen did, this, that, and the other thing. At the end, I was making the distinction between a body-based sense of identity and a spirit-based sense of identity. But at the time, I didn't quite fully realize that, indeed, you and I are more space than we are these forms. And what I remember thinking at the end was that if you look at the symbolism of the cross in Christianity and the crucified Christ, that's a symbol for all of us in Christianity. Talk about bearing picking up your cross, bearing your cross to bear, and so forth, of the suffering and the things that are challenged in life. But the symbol of the Christ crucified is a good symbol to remind us of, like, when we're totally identified with the body and mind, we suffer. The empty cross with the resurrected Christ, empty, is just reminding us that we are that space, and the cross forming a T, that when we realize we identify with that space, we are transcending the stress and suffering in life. Now, another symbol from the Kabbalah is the tree of life. Now, the tree of life, it's interesting. Its roots are in heaven, and its branches hang down toward the earth. And so, when you look at that symbol, you are transplanting your rootedness in the body-mind with your roots in this spaciousness, and the body-mind is an extension of that, so that the branches and the blossoming down of the branches and the blossoming forth and bearing fruit of love, peace, and joy is what happens when you are rooted in the space of heaven. When you're aware of yourself as the night sky or as the day blue sky. Storms come and go, but you are that space. So remember this week, pay attention to the space that you see in your rooms, when you're at work or wherever, and begin to let yourself take a breath and feel that inner space, that inner breathing room. Okay, so notice the space between, and notice that you are that. Have a great week.